In this video, we are going to look at the difference between mediation and moderation. A mediation model seeks to identify and explain the process that underlies an observed relationship between independent variable and dependent variable via the inclusion of a third hypothetical variable known as a mediator variable. Rather than a direct causal relationship between the independent and dependent variable, mediation model proposes that the independent variable influences the mediator and the mediator, which in turn influences the dependent variable. Let's look at it in a graphical, visual way. Here we are looking at how independent variable affects the mediator and the mediator influences the dependent variable. We need to touch on as well on the direct and indirect effect. The direct effect is the coefficient C. The direct effect measures the extent to which the dependent variable changes when the independent variable increases by 1 unit and the mediator variable remains unaltered. The indirect effect is the product of path coefficients A and B. The indirect effect measures the extent to which the dependent variable changes when the independent variable is held fixed and the mediator variable changes by the amount it would have changed had the independent variable increased by 1 unit. And let's look at an example which would be even better to understand it. In a study on socioeconomic status and reading ability in children, we hypothesize that parental education level is a mediator. This means that socioeconomic status affects reading ability mainly through its influence on parental educational levels. So again, this means that the parental education levels will influence and affect the reading ability of children. In summary, what we need to remember is that mediation analysis is a way of statistically testing whether a variable is a mediator using linear regression analysis or ANOVAs. In full mediation, a mediator fully explains the relationship between the independent and dependent variable. And without the mediator in the model, there is no relationship. There can be also partial mediation where there's still a statistical relationship between the independent and dependent variable, even when the mediator is taken out of the model and the mediator only partially explains the relationship. Now let's move on to moderation. In statistics, it occurs when the relationship between two variables depends on a third variable referred to as the moderator variable. The effect of moderating variable is characterized statistically as an interaction, which can be categorical or quantitative. So the categorical variable, it can be either ethnicity, race, religion, health status, or class. And in the quantitative variable, it can be anything like age, weight, height, income, or visual stimulus size. And this effect of moderating variable, it affects the direction or strength of the relation between dependent and independent variables. Just think of moderation in very simple terms. It's just another term for interaction. In analysis of variance, a basic moderator effect can be represented as an interaction between a focal independent variable and a factor that specifies the appropriate conditions for its operation. Moderating variables can have the following effects. It can either strengthen the relationship between the two variables or weaken the relationship between the two variables but also it can negate the relationship between two variables. We can look at it conceptually by looking at the effect of the independent variable on the outcome or the dependent variable, and how it's influenced or dependent by the moderator. When we speak of moderation, we usually call the first predictor an independent variable and the second the moderator. In other words, we are really just interested in the effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable, and this effect is different at different values of the moderator. We are never interested in the effect of the moderator on the dependent variable. When we speak of interaction, we don't usually distinguish between independent variable and the moderator. Either predictor could be considered to moderate the effect of the other. Mathematically, there is no distinction, and you don't have to interpret one variable as the independent variable and the other as the moderator, but it can help interpretation to think of them that way. Now let's look at our first example. One of the clearest examples of moderation was presented by Cohen and Wills in 1985. They argued that the social support literature had neglected to consider the role of social support as a moderator of the stress to adjustment relationship. This moderation relationship is often depicted in the following way. The schematic suggests that the relationship between stress and depression might differ in strength at different levels of social support. In other words, stress may be more strongly associated with depression under conditions of low social support compared to conditions of high social support. And most research had examined the main effect with a view of social support, namely that the more social support that one engages in, the better one's adjustment, therefore less depression. In our second example, which can be very similar, we are looking at the number of hours you do exercise in order to lose weight, and the moderator is the age as a number, which means that the relationship between exercise and weight loss may differ across the different levels of ages, meaning the younger people might lose weight faster by doing exercise versus, let's say, the older population. And in summary, just keep these visual models in mind, where you can see that the mediation model proposes that the independent variable influences mediator, and the mediator in turn influences the dependent variable. So mediator must be a causal result of the independent variable and antecedent of the dependent variable. And in moderation, the moderating variables can have the following effects, which, as we talked about, it can either strengthen, weaken, or negate the relationship between the independent, or the effect between the independent and the dependent variable. And as the last slide, here is just the visual representations of our examples. And this concludes our video on the differences between moderation and mediation. Please click subscribe so not to miss any future how-to videos to better understand statistics. Ciao!